Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. Thank you for joining us this evening. As always, if you need a forecast on the fly, you can call our 24-hour forecast line at 1-800-472-0391 and get a general forecast for your area over the phone. If you have internet access, you can also visit us at weather.gov/Alaska and either click on the map or type in your city, state, or zip code to find a localized forecast right for your area. If you ever have any feedback or comments for us, feel free to email us anytime at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. We don't have anything in the way of actual hazards out today, so we're going to start off by looking at fire danger, which has been on the increase. We're looking at high fire danger for much of the Yukon Flats area, extending through a portion of the Brooks Range and up to some of the North Slope area. This is something that we're going to be keeping an eye on for the rest of the week as we have thunderstorms in the forecast for parts of the area and could see some wildfires start with those thunderstorms and that high fire danger to begin with. Taking a look at our satellite imagery, our main feature is a low pressure system in the northern Gulf. That's bringing a slug of moisture into the south central and Matsu Valley areas. We also have some cloudiness over much of the state with not a whole lot in the way of clear skies. Rain headed into the Panhandle today, and not so much rain, but just clouds from the Brooks Range up to the North Slope. We also have some fog over the Seward Peninsula and eastern Bering Sea today. For today's weather, we talked about that low pressure system over the northern Gulf. That's our main feature today, and it's actually a little bit unique because it's bringing in quite a lot of rain to south central Kenai Peninsula and the Matsu Valley areas. We also have thunderstorms expected today for a little bit further north in the interior for that southeastern interior as well as over the Brooks Range today. And that fog that we talked about over Seward Peninsula stretching into the eastern Bering Sea down to the Yukon Delta, as well as some fog lingering today along the North Slope areas. We have a secondary low just south of the Panhandle, so that's going to be bringing some showers into the Panhandle area today. And then high pressure centered over the Bering Sea, but with light winds around that high pressure system, we do expect to see some fog today for parts of the Bering Sea, particularly north of the Aleutians. With that slug of moisture that we talked about coming into south central and Matsu Valley today, we have some rainfall records that could fall. In fact, Anchorage today has seen 0.54 inches of rain as of 2 p.m. today at the airport. That's only 1/100th of an inch short of the July 8th record for Anchorage Airport, which is 0.55 inches, and that was set in 1967. Also a wet day at Talkeetna, where as of 2 p.m. today, we've seen 0.93 inches of rain, so almost an inch of rain for Talkeetna so far today. And the record is just 1.2 inches for July 8th. That was set in 1936. So quite a long time ago that record was set, and with continuing rain through this evening and into the overnight hours a bit, we could see that record fall. So we'll try to address that tomorrow once we have the final numbers in and see if both of those records or either of them set a new record for July 8th rainfall. For tonight, we still have that low pressure system in the northern Gulf, so still going to be seeing rain in the Kenai Peninsula, south central and Matsu Valley areas, showers a lot of other locations for the Gulf Coast and north up to about the Yukon Flats area. Fog expected to continue for the North Slope, the Chukchi Sea coast, as well as the west coast of the state. And then offshore the North Slope, we could see some freezing fog tonight. So if you have reason to be out in a boat in the Arctic Sea tonight, be on the lookout for that freezing fog and impacts from it. Still high pressure in the Bering Sea tonight, with some showers in the Bering Sea as well as in the Aleutians. rain continuing for the panhandle with a trough coming off the east side of that low pressure system coming up into the panhandle tonight. For Thursday, we'll see that low pressure system in the Gulf continuing to persist there with troughs coming off of it, and that's going to be bringing rain along the Gulf Coast with showers further into the interior and thunderstorms developing from about the Alaska Range north to the south side of the Brooks Range on the east side of the mainland. And that over the Yukon Flats area is where we see that high fire danger that we talked about earlier. So if we get enough lightning, we could see some fire starts tomorrow afternoon, something to keep an eye on and something to watch out for if you are in that Yukon Flats area. Low pressure over Western Canada, continuing rain there, and then we'll see high pressure continuing in the Bering Sea. So not much rain, pretty dry conditions for the west coast where that fog is likely to persist. Not a whole lot of break for the Seward Peninsula, the Yukon Delta, and even points out to about St. Lawrence Island with that fog for Thursday. On Friday, low pressure starts shifting southward into the Gulf, so a little bit of a break, especially for the western side of the Gulf for the Alaska Peninsula. But we'll continue to see some rain from about south central eastward through the Panhandle, and thunderstorms developing, although probably a smaller area of thunderstorms on Friday afternoon, just north of the Alaska Range. Some showers extending further north from there into the eastern Brooks Range, although we have high pressure that's going to be developing just east of the border with Canada over the Arctic Ocean. So we'll see dry weather across the North Slope as well as along the west coast with continuing high pressure dominating over the Bering Sea. Dry conditions from the eastern Aleutians through the southern Alaska Peninsula, but we will see low pressure starting to move into the Aleutians from the south with an occluded front decaying but still bringing some rain into the central and western Aleutians on Friday. For temperatures, Thursday morning, we're looking at temperatures right around or above freezing for the North Slope. As we shift southward into the interior, we'll see temperatures around 50 for Thursday morning across much of the interior, about 45 to 50 for the Yukon Delta, and low 40s for the Seward Peninsula. As we get down into south central, a little bit warmer, especially with that rain that we've been seeing. So low 50s for some of south central and around 50 for the Alaska Peninsula and down through the Aleutians. Also upper 40s to low 50s for the Panhandle overnight tonight into Thursday morning. For Thursday afternoon, it'll be a warm one for some folks. We're looking at temperatures around 70 for much of that central interior area between the Alaska Range and the Brooks Range. Although we'll see our warmest temperatures in the upper 70s for the Mat-Su Valley tomorrow, as well as some mid 70s further into the southeastern portion of the mainland. West Coast a little bit cooler with temperatures just in the 50s and even some upper 40s. For the Seward Peninsula, about 56 degrees at Nome, 58 at Bethel, 49 for St. Lawrence Island on Thursday. Temperatures for the Aleutians ranging from the upper 40s to about the mid 50s. And then for the Panhandle, some temperatures into the 60s for the northern Panhandle, about 63 at Yakutat, 61 at Juneau for Thursday afternoon. For Friday morning, a little bit cooler for the North Slope with temperatures maybe dropping even a little bit below freezing for Friday morning. Interior temperatures also a little bit cooler in the mid 40s to around 50 degrees. A little bit warmer though for the West Coast with low temperatures just in the mid to upper 40s. We'll probably see some more cloud cover. That's what's going to be keeping those temperatures a little bit higher. Upper 40s to low 50s for the Panhandle as well as South Central. And then Friday afternoon, not quite as warm as Thursday, so temperatures peaking in the low 70s even for the warmest areas. Lots of upper 60s for the interior and upper 50s to low 60s for the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to a look at your aviation weather. Starting with flying weather for Thursday morning, we expect IFR conditions along much of the North Slope as well as the immediate west coast of the mainland. Also IFR conditions for much of the Panhandle on Thursday morning and for the central and western Aleutians. MVFR for a lot of the southern part of the mainland on Thursday morning as well as the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. For Thursday afternoon, we'll see some improvement, particularly over the southern mainland to VFR and the Panhandle to MVFR conditions. Still IFR along some of the immediate west coast as well as St. Lawrence Island and much of the Aleutians and the immediate North Slope for Thursday afternoon though. For Friday morning, fairly similar to Thursday morning, we'll see IFR return to the North Slope as well as parts of the Yukon Delta and the Northern Seward Peninsula, and then the entire Aleutians expected to have IFR conditions. IFR conditions relegated in the Panhandle to the southern Panhandle areas, with MVFR conditions stretching from the rest of the Panhandle basically all the way through South Central and up to the Alaska Range for the mainland. Friday afternoon, mostly MVFR conditions along the North Slope and along the immediate portions of the West Coast, with IFR mainly staying offshore the West Coast for Friday afternoon. IFR conditions for the western and central Aleutians, with MVFR for the eastern Aleutians as well as southern portions of the Alaska Peninsula. A combination of MVFR and IFR for the Kenai Peninsula, but mostly MVFR stretching along the northern Gulf Coast and into the Panhandle for Friday afternoon. Pass conditions, VFR for our northern passes at Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass. We'll see thunderstorms for pretty much all of our passes for the southern portion of the state. So Lake Clark Pass, MVFR improving to VFR in the afternoon. Merrill starting IFR and improving to VFR in the afternoon, both expecting thunderstorms in the afternoon on Thursday. Rainy Pass, MVFR improving to VFR with afternoon thunderstorms. Windy Pass, same thing, MVFR improving to VFR with afternoon thunderstorms. Isabel Pass, MVFR in the morning, VFR conditions in the afternoon, but again, afternoon thunderstorms. And Mentasta Pass, MVFR improving to VFR in the afternoon, but again, expecting afternoon thunderstorms there. VFR through the day at Tanita Pass, but we'll see some thunderstorms in the afternoon. Portage Pass, MVFR improving to VFR, but again with afternoon thunderstorms. And Chilkoot and White Passes, both VFR through the day, no thunderstorms at either of those passes. Looking at freezing levels, pretty high as we might expect for July, so about 8,000 feet over much of the state, with even warmer air coming into the western Aleutians and the western Bering with 10 to 12,000 foot freezing levels there. For icing, a couple of spots pretty high though, above 10,000 feet for the northern Gulf and into the south central area a little bit, and then some spots of above 10,000 feet for the west coast for the Yukon Delta as well as just north of St. Lawrence Island. Jet stream winds, we've got low pressure in the northern Gulf, so our main jet is going to be to the west and south of that, stretching from the Bering Sea down through the Alaska Peninsula and into the Gulf, about 90 to 110 knots out of the northwest there. A little bit of secondary jet streak over Kenai Peninsula out of the north to northeast at about 55 knots. 9,000 foot winds, we've got that low in the northern Gulf and then high pressure in the western Bering Sea. Our strongest winds are going to be in the Gulf, where we'll see 35 to 40 knots out of the west and northwest, 25 to 30 knots out of the northwest for the Bering Sea, and mostly 10 to 15 knots over the mainland, with a little bit of 30 knots out of the northeast over south central. For 3,000 feet, same picture. We have our low pressure system over the northern Gulf and high pressure over the western Bering Sea, and our strongest winds are going to be on the west side of that low in the Gulf, so 35 to 40 knots out of the northeast, stretching from about Prince William Sound south and west to just east of Kodiak Island. And then we have low pressure approaching into the western Aleutians, so 30 to 35 knots out of the southeast there. Turbulence below 4,000 feet for the Alaska Peninsula and below 3,000 feet for the western Aleutians. Stay tuned for more Alaska weather after this.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of their systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases, cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
Averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there, or we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of the passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of their primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out-of-state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both of those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so that'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for a look at your marine forecast. Starting out with the sea ice edge, we can see that most of the ice has melted between Point Ley and Utqiagvik at this point, with just some small bits left in that area. We're also seeing the ice starting to break up between Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay. We expect that to continue through the week with just marginal ice between Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay by the end of the week this week. Taking a look at the southeast marine forecast, we can see winds 15 to 25 knots across the Gulf out of the south and east for Thursday. For the inside waterways, winds out of the south 10 to 15 knots. Seas just ranging from about 5 to 7 feet for the Gulf and about 2 to 3 feet for those inside waterways. Looking into Friday, winds coming down a little bit over the Gulf, 15 to 20 knots. Seas also coming down just a little bit along with that, 5 to 6 knots. 5 to 6 feet that is. Winds over the inside waterways still out of the south, 10 to 20 knots on Friday. Thursday across South Central, we've got winds anywhere from 10 to about 20 knots, with the highest winds 25 knots out of the east for that North Gulf area. We'll see winds elsewhere more out of the north and a little bit of northwest near the Barings. Seas ranging from about 5 to 7 feet across the Gulf, 2 feet for Prince William Sound, and about 2 to 3 feet for Cook Inlet on Thursday. Heading into Friday, we'll see those winds come down and seas along with them a little bit. So winds just 10 to 15 knots across the board on Friday. Seas 3 to about 6 feet for the Gulf, about 2 feet still in Prince William Sound, and about 3 feet in Cook Inlet for Friday. Thursday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas, winds 20 to 25 knots out of the northwest, seas 5 to 6 feet across the board really on Thursday, a pretty consistent forecast for the entire area. As we go into Friday, those winds are going to come down just a little bit, as well as the seas. So winds out of the northwest, 15 to 20 knots, seas 4 to 5 feet. We will see around Kodiak Island winds more out of the southwest, 15 knots on Friday. The Aleutian chain on Thursday, we're looking at 15 to 25 knot winds out of the east for most of the Aleutians, but those far eastern Aleutians on the north and south side of Unalaska, 10 to 15 knots out of the north, so a little bit of a different direction there. Seas rather low at 4 to 6 feet, with 7 feet peaking for the western Aleutians on Thursday. For Friday, winds coming up a little bit and seas along with them. So generally 25 to 30 knot winds out of the east for the Aleutians. Still lighter as we head east, 15 knots out of the northeast for the easternmost areas of the Aleutians. Seas up to 8 to 10 feet, but again with those lighter winds further east, we'll see 3 to 4 feet for the eastern Aleutians. Thursday, we're looking at 10 to 20 knots of wind for much of the west coast out of the north and northwest. We'll see 2-foot seas in Norton Sound, increasing to about 4 to 5 foot seas as we get out into the open Bering Sea. For Friday, winds coming down a little bit, 10 to 15 knots, seas around 3 feet across the board. We'll see our lightest winds further south down near the Pribilofs as we have high pressure dominating in that area on Friday and not a lot of flow to speak of. For the Arctic coast on Thursday, 10 knots generally out of the north and northeast for the North Slope areas, as well as about 10 to 15 knots out of the northeast for the Chukchi Sea coast and coming out of the Bering Strait for Thursday. Friday, winds coming down a little bit along the North Slope, just 5 to 10 knots, 15 to 20 knots, so coming up a little bit for the northwest coast, still out of the north and northeast in general on Friday. Recapping our weather for tonight, we still have that moisture coming into the northern Gulf with that low pressure still in the northern Gulf area. So rain for Kenai Peninsula, South Central, Matsu Valley, that area. Showers further north towards the Alaska Range, and rain for the Panhandle. Thanks so much for watching Alaska TV Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.